Thank you for tuning into my talk today, exploring the experiences of New Zealanders at a virtual anatomy museum. This presentation includes pictures of remains from our donors, so out of respect to them and their families, please do not record or screen capture any of this presentation. So to begin, here's a brief background to this research. I'm a biological anthropologist, and I'm very interested in how we engage the general public with our research. And in particular, I'm interested in the role that human remains play in engaging the public. Now, I'm based in New Zealand, where there's very little human material on display in our public museums. But at the University of Otago, we do have an anatomy museum, which curates and displays over 3,000 models and specimens of human anatomy. Whilst not entirely open to the public, as it is heavily utilised for teaching, community and school groups can arrange to visit, and the museum also puts on guided tours for the public, which are always fully booked. So we know there is a strong interest from members of the public to visit, but we don't really know why they want to, what of the collection they engage with, and what sort of experiences they are having. So this study aimed to address these unknowns. And this was done by surveying visitors using a pre- and post-visit survey design that included both open and closed-ended questions to answer the following. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about these here, as I will talk to them later with the results. But it is hoped that by addressing these questions, relevant and appropriate content can be designed to engage the New Zealand public with research that relates to the human body, such as biological anthropology. So the virtual component of this research was added such that the study could continue during New Zealand's lockdown last year. I teamed up with Jeff Avery, who's a professional filmmaker, and Chris Smith, the museum's curator, to create a high-quality virtual replica of the museum. We did this with 360-degree photography, and we used the 3D Vista software to knit all these panoramic images together. In terms of the survey, participants were given essentially the same questionnaire as those who visited the museum in person, which allowed me to compare in-person with virtual experiences. Now, whilst there are some obvious limitations to an online experience, which I will mention at the end of this talk, I haven't yet come across any significant differences in engagement with the Anatomy Museum collection between the two groups. So, in the interest of time, this presentation is going to focus on the results from the visitors to the virtual museum. Now, I know that finding might seem a bit surprising, so before I go into the results, I want to show you a bit of the virtual museum and explain how we created it to mimic an in-person visit as much as possible. But I do also want to acknowledge that the virtual by no means replaces the in-person experience. So the following clip gives you an idea of what it was that we created. So the experience begins with an information page that provides navigation instructions. And then it really came down to setting the scene. I felt it was important for my virtual visitors to start outside looking at the Lindo Ferguson building, which houses the museum on its second floor. Now, this is a grand building, as you can see, and I thought it would help to provide a sense of being present. Now, this setting of the scene was continued as we enter the Lindo Ferguson and head up the flight of stairs to reach the entrance of the museum. Now, when visitors click to enter the museum, a video automatically plays which shows historical photos of the museum and has audio of Chris, the curator, talking about the museum's history. This was included as members of the public who visit the museum in person will always get a talk of this kind, so it's important that we provided this information, and because it also adds context and understanding for our virtual visitors of what it is they're about to enter and see. So once inside, visitors can navigate by the various hotspots around the collection, so it's very much like Google Street View, as you can sort of see here. And at these hotspots, there are also icons that can be clicked on to bring up high-resolution photos, such as the one here. So if we click on this icon, we get this high-resolution photo with some detail. But more significantly, I think, are the video icons that play about 1 to 2 minute short videos of important pieces of interest in the collection. And these videos were created again in efforts to mimic an in-person experience where a guide would talk about a particular exhibit of interest. And this also provided some engaging content that encouraged our virtual visitors to keep exploring the space. And we know from participant comments that these videos were really enjoyed. So now for some results. What I will be presenting are preliminary results. I have a lot more in-depth analysis to undertake, and I'll also be conducting interviews with participants to really understand the hows and whys of their experience. But so far, I've had 220 people complete the survey. My age ranges from 16 all the way to 81. I could not survey younger than 16 due to the ethics category this project falls under. Majority of my participants are New Zealand European Pakeha. 30% have visited this anatomy museum before, and just over a half of them don't work or study in any field relating to the human body. So, looking at our first research question, exploring why the public are interested in visiting the Anatomy Museum. In the pre-visit survey, participants are asked their reasons for visiting, and multiple options are provided, and they can select multiple options. So general curiosity and interest in human anatomy were the major reasons, but also over 1/3 of visitors selected interest in the virtual technology as a reason to visit, which is kind of neat. The other aspect to this research question was participants' expectations for their visit. And here I was specifically interested in what emotions or feelings they thought they would experience. And the reason for this is that we don't just make sense of our experiences through argument or fact. Our emotions play a large part of our meaning making. And I think this is especially true when it comes to us viewing the remains of others. So here's a word cloud of responses. The larger the font, the more often that word was reported. Words in orange are the positive emotions, and the negative emotions are in black. And in the post-visit survey, participants were asked how strongly they felt their anticipated emotions on a scale of 0, not at all, to 6, a lot. And I've arbitrarily decided if participants rated a 4, 5, or 6, then they did feel their emotions. And so these are plotted on this word cloud here. And what is interesting is that the positive emotions that were anticipated were generally felt, but the negative emotions were not as much. So people anticipating a sense of sadness or disgust, majority of the time didn't end up feeling that way. Now, emotions are really complex, and this is a very superficial overview. So I'll be exploring this in more detail in my interviews. Next, I was really interested in how people responded to different presentations of human remains, so specifically anatomical models, skeletal material, and plastinates. So my reasons for selecting these presentation types were, well, one, I've got a particular affinity for bones, and I wanted to see if skeletal material engages people without offending or disturbing them. Regarding the plastinates, I wanted to see how the public respond to fleshed material and if it's more emotive. And I included anatomical models as I wanted to see if people found models less emotive than real human tissue. Now, these photos that you see here on your screen were presented in a randomized order in the post-visit survey, and participants were asked to rate how strongly they felt 3 positive emotions, so fascinated, curious, and amazed, and 3 negative emotions, offended, disgusted, disturbed. On a scale of 0 to 6, these emotions were selected from the literature around public's response to human remains. And the heads and hands were selected as they're instantly recognizable for what they are, and they're quite emotive in themselves. So if we look at the results for the head images, the plastinates exhibited a significant difference for all emotions compared against the model and skeletal images. I would like to point out that the mean response for negative emotions was very low, particularly for offended. And we see the same trend for the hand images. However, there is also a significant difference in the mean scores for the disgusted and disturbed between the model and the skeletal images, with the model being more emotive. A question that went with each of these photo ratings asked if the participant thought that the image looked real. So I need to really look at whether those who scored the model hand as disgusting or disturbing also thought the model looked real, as that could be a reason why people found the model more emotive than the skeletal. So next we're looking at, what of the collection were people really engaging with? So what did they find most interesting? So we've got the plastinations, corrosion casts, anatomical models, lungs, GI tract, tattooed lymph nodes, and pathology. These were kind of the key things that people kept mentioning. And the follow-up to this was, why did you find this interesting? So we did some thematic analysis, and we got some of these common themes, which were appreciation for, the human anatomy, authenticity, being able to see the real stuff, the real bits, appreciation of artistic representation. So there was a lot of appreciation for the skill and artistry involved in creating the models or specimens or dissections. The educational value, the environmental impact, so in particular the effect of pollution on our lungs, and personal reflection. These often related to pathological specimens and really getting to people think about their own health. So on the flip side, also wanted to find out if anything in the collection made people feel uncomfortable. So participants were asked this question you see here on the left, and 35% of participants said, yep, something did make them feel uncomfortable. So they were given this follow-up question of, okay, well, what was it and why? And these were sort of the responses coming out of that text box. So if we look at common themes, a major one was heads and faces. And I should say these were related to plastinates or sort of fleshed material. None of the comments about being uncomfortable related to skeletal material. The next was presentation, how the remains were presented. And this was in particular to the plastination store. So this is a room that is off the side of the museum that is essentially a room of plastinated body bits of our donors, and it's a teaching collection, so it's not displayed in a traditional museum way. It is just stacks of body bits in a room, and people did find that rather disturbing. Reminder of life or death, our inevitable mortality, just recognizing that these were once living, breathing, walking human beings. And personal experience. So again, these were usually related to pathologies. So if someone knew someone who had suffered from a particular condition, it could evoke these uncomfortable memories. So on a more positive note, one of the first questions of the post-visit survey asked participants this question, which really explores what is at the forefront of their mind when they think back on what they just experienced. And as you can see, there are a lot of positives. It's interesting, informative, fascinating, amazing, intriguing, wow, which that's pretty great. But there are also some negatives, such as frustrating and slow. So these really lead on to our limitations. First of which was bandwidth. This is a large data file, so a strong and stable internet connection is required. Without that, the experience can be slow and jilted. Something that we had to do to address this was compress the whole file, which meant that some of our resolution was compromised. So people lost the ability to zoom in and see really clear detail in the panoramic photos. And then the sort of final limitation is, this is really a controlled and curated experience. We have selected what exhibits to make videos of and show high resolution photos of. You can't just move through the space and stop where something catches your eye and see more detail with it, and you can't pick anything up. So you lose that really tangible aspect of being there in person. However, in spite of these limitations, our virtual visitors are still engaging with the collection and having an emotion-rich experience, as you can see from the answers to the 3 words question and the emotions questions. And so I'm really looking forward to exploring their experiences deeper in my upcoming interviews. So I just want to say a big thank you to my supervisors, the University of Otago, and in particular the Department of Anatomy for funding, and to you all. Thank you for watching.